Let's go.
Okay, ya activé la transmisión.
Hey, thank you for coming. Good morning, good afternoon for some people around the world. We are here in another pre-event of our 18th International Docomomo Conference, which will be held in Santiago de Chile in 2024. We have today two speakers related with the urban residents and ideas of transformation. One of the speakers is Hania Gomez. Hania is the chair of Docomomo Venezuela and member of the Fundación para la Memoria in Venezuela also. And the other is Andrés Telles. Andrés is member of Docomomo Chile and professor of the Finisterre University here in Santiago. Thank you both for preparing this pre-event of our conference, and thank you for coming to all the people who are online at this moment by Zoom and by YouTube. So we have these two excellent speakers. So I ask to start with Hania. Do you want to start or address? Which, yes, Hania, go ahead. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your support to have to support the candidacy of Santiago, and thank you for all your work in Venezuela.
Thank you, Horacio, for this introduction, and my greetings to all the viewers around the world, and also to Andrés. Hello, Andrés. It's an honor to share today's presentations with you. We are going to be presenting, of course, a building from Venezuela, addressing next year's Docomomo International Conference in Santiago de Chile, dedicated to modern future, sustainable development, and cultural diversity. And also today's pre-event, Urban Residences, Heritage and Transformation. We wanted to revisit a remarkable Venezuelan urban residence from the 1970s. Residencia Caraballeda from 1974 by the Caracas-based architecture studio of Benacerraf y Gomez. Our title, Residencia Caballeda, a room with a window facing the sun to enjoy the Venezuelan sky, is from a phrase written in 1974 by Gio Ponti, the Italian modern master who had so much to do with Caracas in the 1950s and who knew very well this project from the beginning and very much admired it. Ponti had built in 1957 the magnificent Villa Planchard on a hill, El Cerrito, overlooking Caracas, and with time became more and more influential on the local modern architecture community. Therefore, we will be able to appreciate his influence also on this residence. By 1970, the benevolent cultural patrons Ana Luisa and Armando Planchard, Gio Ponti's famous ideal clients, had already been dueling in his villa for more than a decade. It was then when they started to be concerned for its conservation and preservation, but also for providing the city with a second and final gift. This time a house for the elderly that would receive mainly guests from their close circle of friends who were becoming older as they did. This was the origin of the Fundación Planchard, who since then owns both buildings, Villa Planchard and Residencia Caraballeda, operating to today. The villa, in a way, provides funds for the residents, but both modern heritages are very expensive and difficult to conserve today. For their new project, Planchards thought of finding again a virtual place as a departure point, like they did once for Villa Planchard. This is an aerial view, satellite view of Caracas, which you know it's on a valley up on the mountains, and then other part of the city is on the coastline on the Caribbean. A place with a magnificent view, this time on a quiet slope on the Caracas coastline in the location of Caraballeda overlooking the Caribbean Sea. As for the architects, the couple chose the award-winning firm of Benacerraf and Gomez of Moisés Benacerraf Coriat, Yale, 1944, and Carlos Gómez de Llarena, Universidad Central de Venezuela, 1968, who had at the time already designed in Caracas a list of important modern buildings. By 1973, they had just finished Torre Europa, 1971, for whose design they would receive the National Award of Architecture 1976, and had won the 1970 first prize for the national competition for a new Palace of Justice, where the head of the jury was architect Ayoming Pei. At the time they received the commission from the Blanchards, the firm of Benacerraf and Gomez were currently designing the Hotel Meliá Caribe, 1975, also in Caraballeda, near to the plot of land where new residencia was to be built. Here you can see Caraballeda's strip of shore and the two locations of the two parallel buildings, the residence to the right. This is an aerial view of the Hotel Meliá Caribe, close to the Caraballeda Lagoon, to the right. Caracas in the beginning of the 70s continued being an effervescent construction site, reaffirmed in its further modernity after 3 decades of continuous and brilliant architectural production. And the beautiful location of Caraballeda on the coastline with its lagoon, its yacht club, its golf club, and its recently developed modern neighborhoods was the perfect seaside hub to go on with the modern building process right on the side of the mountain. Benacerraf and Gomez, one of the most important architecture studios in the recent history of Venezuela, had a key role in this process. In their joint work, made the memory of Venezuela's own modernity and the belief in the need to give new importance to the urban realm. In their architecture, they paid close attention to the sophistication of design and to the importance of a structure, but also shared an aspiration towards excellency in the construction quality and the refinement in the details. This led to what is called the double leitmotif in Benacerraf y Gomez work. A good example of this were the Caraballeda's projects. The Hotel Meliá Caribe designed and built in parallel to the project of Residencia Caraballeda, a similar situation in which Gio Ponti found himself in his office in 1957, with the parallel projects of Villa Blanchard and the Pirelli Tower. We can see in the hotel, as well as in the residence, how their architecture increasingly rose conceptually in its contents and its performance, filling up with other meanings. All their architectures cannot be considered only as specific works, isolated objects, but as part of a tissue where a series of themes are interwoven and developed with time, common denominators of an always experimental and urban responsible architecture. So in the Hotel Meliá Caracas that we see here, as well, we will see also in the Residencia Caraballeda, we observe this double leitmotif. On one side, the outside expression of the building as an explanation of its components and of its construction, and on the other, the response of the building to the surroundings and its role as modeler of the environment. Therefore, the Hotel Meliá Caribe and the Residencia Caraballeda were an opportunity to retake the firm's conductive thread of the irreplaceable building, key to understand and resolve the whole context and comply with an urban obligation. In the hotel, obviously, they brought in totally new references, like the expressionist architecture of Eric Mendelssohn. Up in the foothills from the hotel and the lagoon, the sunny side chosen by the Blanchards couldn't have been better. Thanks to being placed on the slope of a mountain and close enough to the coastline, the climate was to be particularly beneficial for the health of the future residents, benefiting both from the fresh and clean air that comes down from the Ávila mountain and from the warmer breezes that come up from the sea. The local environment was already promising, as well as the spectacular views. The is very related to the hotel. Here we can see the 1974 brochure of Residencia Caraballeda. As reads in the cover, it is a happy home for people in the age of retirement. And that is the clue word for the whole development, happiness, a lesson the Planchards had learned by heart from their Pontian home and the long relationship they had with Gio Ponti, who described the architecture of his favorite villa as la joie d'y vivre, the joy of living there. Being close to the design experience of the modern masterpiece of Villa Planchard, Gómez de Llarena knew Gio Ponti very well. He took the Milanese master with Armando Planchard to visit the project's construction site. Benacerraf and Gómez project evoked the Pontian ideal of the total work of art and shared the same enthusiasm of his life celebrating architecture, but addressed the tropical environment with their own way of doing modern architecture: rational, contextual, inventive, design-conscious, lyrically stylish, and technically innovative. Let's review the plans of Residencia Caraballeda very quickly. We find the long and curved slab that runs parallel to the sea line that departs from Calle Los Indios to the right, where the entrance is placed. Great attention was paid to the morphology of the topography. The building was designed to adapt itself closely to the parallel lines of the descending terrain. The way building unfolds its long shape from its corner side, where the cylindrical volume of the chapel works as an anchor, detached from the complex to guarantee its operational autonomy. The building becomes, thus, a glove that fits perfectly in the place and makes it understandable and logical. From the very first sketches, the architecture creates and solves the urban situation where it was placed. Afterwards, it will become indispensable to understand the space as happens today. Consisting of 5 stories, plus a service basement with a children's medical dispensary, the building was designed to accommodate 75 guests in 66 rooms, 9 suites, many collective spaces and terraces overlooking the sea, and a landscape garden that extends to the north. It is a useful plan with a layered order. In fact, levels displayed to cascade to the garden, progressively augmenting their area in order to fuse with the topography. Residencia Caraballeda expresses outside what is on the inside, what are its organs, how it is its inner arrangement. Great importance was given to the psychological well-being of the guests. Therefore, the service and the guests' flows can meet, but not those flows that have to do with the handling of the deceased guests. Therefore, the elevators are big enough to carry a clinical bed and have 2 doors, and a morgue is placed in the basement with direct access to the street. The same happens with the design of the chapel, whose religious services can perform without being noticed from the interior of the building. A children's dispensary on the lower level with an independent access as the chapel serves as a community facility, and over time has helped to develop a wonderful relationship with the nearby neighbor. As Hotel Meliá Caribe before, Residencia Caraballeda is somehow also a brutalist building, but has altogether something of the rigor of Mies or of Louis Kahn, with this idea of creating volumes, masses, and equilibriums, and at the same time, conscious asymmetries. The elevator shaft, covered in bright yellow glass mosaics, rises higher to act as a street sign, but also indicates the scission between the 2 very distinct facades of the building. One more brutalist, facing the mountain, covered with big industrial aluminum louvers, which create a climate-controlled tall space for the corridors, and the other lighter, lineal, sinuous, and evocative of Alto's architecture, made with the lines of the ramps and the railings of the balconies. This is architecture. Sorry, I think I missed. Oh, okay. This is an architecture that can be perfectly well understood from the outside, which are its parts, which are its constitutive elements, how are the rooms, how are the services, how the means of escape, where the circulation, the access, the elevators. The exterior expression is the result of how it works on the inside. In April 1974, the Planchards inaugurated Residencia Caraballeda. The new house for the elderly was imbued of the same creative spirit of their worldly acclaimed private house, Villa Planchard, essentially being an avant-garde work of architecture filled with design and art now from the 70s. In this series of black and white photographs taken from the occasion, we can appreciate how it was conceived to provide a new vision for a particular endeavor, to become not just a hospital or a hospice, although providing both services, but a pleasurable home for senior adults to enjoy their golden years. Residencia was meant from the beginning to be a part of the everlasting patrimony of the recently created foundation, so it was built strong enough to last. Here, Serrano Gomez add another experimentation topic that will be recurrent in their work, their corner site treatment. We can see it in the special attention dedicated to the design of the chapel, which was an art collaboration with major Venezuelan artist Alejandro Otero. Otero designed the window bars of the facades and also a vertical stained glass and a major skylight called cenital color, which spectacularly covers the circular space. In Residencia Caraballeda, everything can be understood from the outside, as we can see in this photograph. It is a readable architecture. The idea is to do justice to the corner site. In the corner site is the corner site as an urban fact. Therefore, the corner site volume is like a sculpture. The main or south facade facing the high mountain is, as we said, very strong. A corner accuses the scission between the two facades. This was the building as seen from the west in 1974, an architecture both delicate and bold, Altian resonances. From where to gaze at the sea from the distance. You can see here in front of the column, Armando Planchard overlooking the garden. 1970s galore was present everywhere in the interior design. Bright colors and typography, everything white. Dining was, and still is, an experience to meet with others. Be cheerful. As Gómez de Gallarino once said, a building once is conceived is sold from the beginning without things that transform it. When time goes by, Residencia Caraballeda remains identical as it was built, remains loyal to the first idea. We can now have a look at the building as it stands to date. This series of photographies were taken 2 weeks ago. Bright colors remain active, although many glass mosaics have fallen. The north facade louvers are perfectly in shape and in place, letting in the cool air to regulate the interior corridors and rooms. Here, we start to appreciate the decay of the ironworks throughout the building. The alignment of this flipped. I'm sorry. This is going to happen because my PowerPoint is not working well, so we will see a lot of turned upside down photographs. I'm sorry for that. Couldn't help it. The alignment of lines and extensive attention to formal detailing is evident everywhere. Here at the main entrance, some brutalist layering in colors and materials in the chapel's entrance with the vibrant Alejandro Otero's grids. A glimpse in of the east balconies doesn't yet reveal the fantastic finding of the north facade. As in Villa Planchard, in the Residencia Caraballeda, as Conti said, the floor is a theme. Now the outside yellow tiles faded because of the sun. The circular and naturally ventilated space of the chapel's interior. As for all the rooms, Benacerraf and Gomez designed all the furniture of the chapel, like this turning confessional in wood, the benches, and this circular wooden bench that runs around the walls. Alejandro Otero was an old-time friend and favorite artist of the Planchards, and also of the architects. Here, his stained glass version of his famous tablones, which are a very famous works of art of Alejandro Otero. This is a flat photograph, I'm sorry for this. Asked to do the skylight, he came with this idea of zenithal colors. Here we see Alejandro Otero to the left. Asked to do the skylight, he came with this idea of zenithal colors that reflect on the concrete surfaces of the ceiling, and also through the circular openings. We have to leave to the imagination the actual format of this photograph too. Yellow, white, and gray, as in Ville Planchard, were the chosen colors for the new project of the Planchards, as in the floor of the chapel's circular staircase. Well, lighting fixtures and interior handrails speak of the taste of the 70s. Entrance to the chapel from the dining area is discreetly hidden. The old fountain's jet is not functioning anymore, though. Guests are dined between a patio and a garden, but new colors like this pink forget the original building's palette. A great staircase occupies the center of the living area. It has a layered handrail, which is like a reminder of the main theme displayed on the multi-layered northern facade. On the upper floors, on the other hand, the shadow brought by the louver's facade creates a calm atmosphere. And a 5-floor house space surprises and gives room for several inner balcony spaces. The louvers have a bold expression, arriving sharply to the curved end of the corridors. Downstairs, the main staircase is an invitation to promenade the building, enter the reading room, or linger under the now highly grown trees of the main floor terrace. To the center of the garden, a circular ramp goes around another pond. With an elaborated railing. And all the grass from the original lawn has disappeared already, in which now is a shadowy tropical forest. The lower levels are less sunny than in 1974. A different and pleasant microclimate has emerged, and the building appears in all the splendor of its cascading levels, multi-layer lines, and multiple parallel lines. From afar, but sadly, when you get closer, the tragedy of the corrosion of the ironworks reminds you that this is a 50-year-old architecture in need of restoration. On the last floor, some repairs are being done to the wood of the suites. Although the building is without a conservation plan yet, therefore, I would like to strongly encourage its realization. And I would like now to finalize my lecture by reading to you a lovely letter that remains in the archives of the Gio Ponti archives in Caracas, in the Fundación Planchard. It's a letter that Ponti wrote to the Planchards in October 23rd, 1974, right after the buildings had opened. And I quote, "Dear Armando Mine and Anala, beautiful. Having seen that you are looking for people, your foundation, I dedicated also myself to the search, having found a highly recommendable one. This person has by name Gio Ponti. When he was young, he was a very beautiful man. He was a good architect and spoke 4 languages. Very well Italian, a little less French, a little less English, and a little less Spanish. We are talking about an authentic old man because he has that youth of which Picasso talks when he says, si on est jeune pour toujours. If we are young forever. But from an ethnographic point of view, he's regular because he's very old. He's 83 years old, has white hair, dentures, a leg with a vitellium femur, a progressive arthrosis, a progressive blindness, a progressive deafness. What else do you want? Older than this, you die. It is true that this gentleman has not many more years to live. He is capable of reading and writing and has a diploma. He is very well educated, clean, and honest. He is in love with the writer Karen Blixen, which he met 10 years ago, and for whom he goes crazy. Regarding the remaining requirements for the elderly in Residencia Caravalleda, he is turning quickly poor, or almost, due to the actual Italian crisis. He will probably sell his beautiful Campigli, a small De Chirico, a Carrà, an Optimum Funi, his beautiful Modigliani Christ, and 2 Sironi. In spite of all this, he is sometimes very happy and writes poetry, books, and makes his pretty drawings. Some days he has happiness attacks. In those days with the stupendous skies, when he walks lightly and finds in his way only that divinely kind and very beautiful people, we have to be very anyway afraid of him. Once he said he has entered Residencia Caravalleda of having a stroke of happiness and die. In this case, he will be buried in the Foundation's garden with this stone. Here sleeps smiling and happy, thinking of Reveron à Le Corbusier, the supreme and eternal Gioponte, 100 years old, value, whose masterpiece was El Cerrito, and who wishes everyone to die like him in state of happiness. Regarding the room at the Foundation, this gentleman prefers a room with a window facing the sun to enjoy the sky of Venezuela. He will spend his time painting and leave his paintings as property of the Fundación. For food, he doesn't want nothing more than tapioca, yuca, once a day, and a little bit of champagne. The garments, he himself will draw the suits for him, for the old man, and especially for the very beautiful old woman over 90 years old. By night, after having painted, he will listen to music. He's going to die happy and healthy after having done marvelous miracles, and all the pheasants will fly from El Cerrito, as well as the parrots, to chirp over his grave. And Julia La Loca, his wife, she will need a room also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hania. It's amazing. I introduce now Andres Telles. Please, Andres, go ahead.
Thank you, Horacio. I will share my screen. Just wait just a little minute. Here we are. This one. Everything's okay? Just a minute, because I have a little problem. Am I sharing the screen?
Yes.
Excuse me. Am I sharing?
No, not complete. You're sharing your path.
Oh, wait a minute. Now, am I sharing it?
Now it's okay.
Oh, it's okay. Well, thank you. Well, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for permitting me to present this research work on housing complexes in Santiago. And thank you, Tania, for sharing this day with these cases of housing complexes located in very different places of Latin America. And we are going a little backwards in time, just around 1935, where these cases start their history. So we are in 1935. This is an aerial view of Santiago and taken by Roberto Gersman. This was a time when the first architectural interventions for the densification of the city center were starting amid the studies and proposals by urban planner Karl H. Brunner. He was an Austrian urbanist who came to Chile in 1929, and he and his team were already working on the new urban plan for Santiago. This was a time also when the construction of the first consciously modern buildings was already taking place. Although in this picture we cannot see many of them, but you can see some of these buildings around the presidential palace here, and some other buildings that were around the Plaza de Armas. This was the foundational colonial place in Santiago. This is the Santa Lucia Hill, and this is the Alameda, the main avenue, which forms with the Mapocho River in the upper right part of this picture, sort of a triangle where the early colonial city was settled. This city has already exploded beyond its colonial limits, but the extensions of the city outside its traditional limits the suburbs were developed according to a model derived from the Anglo-Saxon Garden City. And there was also the replacement of large private properties with low-rise, higher density, and speculative developments already taking place near the center or in the center itself. So the research work we carried on with Cristobal Molina starting in 2006 was aimed to build the construction of a repertoire of modern buildings and complexes that were representative of the central area of Santiago. That is to say, where these modern buildings were located, what were the modes of let's say their placement in the lots or in the public space. Also, we aimed at the valuation of these projects and buildings that participate in the real estate market in the context of the repopulation programs of Central Santiago that were taking place in the early 2000s, from the early 2000s in Santiago, and what was the real value of these 1930s to 1970s buildings had in that context. In the third place, we have the recognition of the work of the private and state sectors in the consolidation of modern living. That is to say, there were private actors, but there were also public actors who were working sometimes together, sometimes in separate ways, but contributing on different scales and on different social levels to the consolidation of the modern living in Central Santiago. And the fourth aim was to compare or make a comparison of recognized and large scale cases with more ordinary examples or less known examples where the practical conditions of domestic life and its contribution to urban life are evident. Well, the center of Santiago, I am not going to take over the history of colonial Santiago. We are starting in the early 1930s with the work of Karl H. Brunner, the Austrian urbanist who made several studies on population density, communication, this way, circulation, and so on. So this was made the densification processes in the center with low density expansion outside its previous limits. The creation of control and prospecting bodies for the development of the city. That is urban plans, modernization of the land ownership regime, state or mixed entities in charge of housing for employees and workers. These were new ones or previous ones that were being almost constantly updated in order to cope with increasing demands of housing in Santiago. And this was also the epoch of an economic boost to construction and real estate speculation just after the 1929 crack, Wall Street crack that affected Chile in a very strong way. So there was the replacement of large areas of land with low-rise houses in the suburbs with plots for high-rise rental buildings in central areas. So these were the consequences of many of these transformation in the center of Santiago. So we built a repertoire of cases and we set up a selection criteria. We worked using the Docomomo fishes, the Docomomo minimum fishes, to make an assessment of the values of many of these buildings. So we made a selection of nearly 50 cases, and finally there were only 25 selected. But these were in one place, those exceptional cases and ordinary cases were altogether, they gathered and they were treated more or less the same way. There were different management models represented in these buildings, that is to say private or public or mixed management models. Pre and post horizontal property law, a law that allowed landowners to divide by flats the apartments. That was not permitted in the years preceding this law. This law is a law of 1937. Also, there was a criteria of taking different urban conditions of the lot by size, by shape, by location, in relation to the most central part of the city, and the diversity in complementary uses and scales. So we ended up making 3 classifications or 3, let's say, families of buildings. The real estate buildings built for rent that were not divided into different proprietors, but just one proprietor who owned the entire building for rent. Horizontal property real estate buildings, and housing complexes for public or mixed public and private management. These were generally the larger projects that were built in the periphery of central Santiago. So these were the best known cases: the Santa María building, the 21 de Mayo or Plaza de Armas building, and the República remodeling. These were built between the 1930s and the 1960s. Each one of these responds to their particular implementation logics, sizes, management models, and programmatic diversity. Each one, in its own way, points to a change in the form of the city the public space and the scale of the interventions. But these are very well-known cases. We aimed also at lesser-known cases or lesser documented cases about that time in the 2006, 2009. These are the cases of the buildings on the Maquiver, Ejército, and Merced streets. These were the products of alterations in the relationship between public space and private space. That is to say, the widening of streets, thus creating different shapes of lots, greater permitted heights. So these buildings also participated in this changing and the regularly shaped lots and the change in property regime. That is, for example, sometimes very difficult lots located in corners or in tips of irregularly shaped blocks. So we aimed at 3 cases of urban transformation that I'm going to bring you here. These are the cases of the Santa Maria building, the Huemul estate, and the Serrano-Eyzaguirre estate. These 3 cases represent 3 approaches to the topic of the housing complex conceived under the parameters of the hygienic housing, the mix of apartment sizes and programs, and the liberation of areas for common and public use, the standardization of types of housing and construction elements, and economical rationality and low maintenance costs. These were buildings that we found that were in full residential use, although they had different fates through time, and we will see them in more detail right now. These are the exhibition that was held on the occasion of the publication of a book about which was the result of this research work. And so we reunited these 3 cases around the documentation that was built about them. These also represent 3 strategic locations with relation to the center of the city. You can see here this foundational triangle we saw recently in the aerial photograph from 1935. So these buildings are located just outside this triangle. Let's say the first one, the Santa Maria building, which is located in the northern bank of the Papocha River, which runs from east to west, and 2 other estate complexes that were built in the peripheral area to the south of the central Santiago. So let's look first at the Santa Maria, then to the Huemul II estate, and then the Serrano-Eyzaguirre project. Well, the Santa Maria was a project promoted by the Bank of Chile through its Department of Trust Commissions. That was an entity that collaborated with the financing of urbanization and building development projects under the new law, that is the sale by floor law of 1937. This is a building that was, in practical terms, 2 buildings tied together. These were, they had a cruciform plan and were located in an isolated and narrow block. This had the advantage of having being isolated among other blocks. You can see here in this aerial 3D model what was the commonplace way of urbanizing the northern part of the central Santiago. But this building established a radically new way of conceiving a building which shared more or less the same density as these ones, but by increasing its height, but liberating the surrounding areas. This had also the advantage of being just in front of the river, the forest park, and the National Fine Arts Museum and the School of Fine Arts just opposite, and just in the opposite side of the river, in the southern bank. The Bank of Chile promoted many kind of urbanization projects, and this was also promoted as the first building that was not created for a rental by a single landowner, but by a community of private owners of the apartments. So these were early architectural journals that were showcasing the promotion of the Banco de Chile, Department of Trust Commissions, and some articles that highlighted the building. This is a model of the building published in Urbanismo and Arquitectura magazine. The building, as I said, was in practical terms two cross-shaped plans tied together. This is the ground floor plan. We had flats of different sizes. Notably, the apartments located in this Central Park were wider in surface, while the apartments located in the other three sides of the building shared more or less the same layout. That changed in the penthouses. There were terraces, and there were taking profit of the northern sun in Santiago, which is the wood sun, and the others that looked over the park and the river. So this building was conceived more or less by the same time. That is one thing Horacio stated once. This building was created more or less at the same time of the Highgate estate in London by Lubetkin and Tecton. The Huemul II was probably the first set of apartment blocks built by the Popular Housing Fund, or the Caja de la Vivienda Popular. This was built by Julio Cordero. He was an architect of the technical department of Popular Housing Fund, and he did a very interesting model housing project here, where the principles of standardized affordable housing were tested with the support of commercial premises and protected free areas inside the complex. You can see here on the early days of the buildings, photographed by Antonio Quintana. There were children playing around in the swimming pool. That was quite a luxury, but it was an important asset for the new dwellers. This was a 180 flat complex and 8 commercial local shops. This is a project that occupies an entire block near an hectare surface. It was built just nearby an early 1910 hygienic project, the Huemul I neighborhood, that was created in the early 90s by Ricardo Larraín Bravo, and it was a private project, but it opened a new way of creating a social housing project. This one was created just nearby, together along with some educational equipment, because this is the Hermanos Mate school, a new square, and a later development made in this part, the Huemul III complex, by built later in the 1940s. But this one is the one that we will see in more detail now. This is a drawing published in Urbanismo y Arquitectura magazine, which highlighted the commercial premises in front of the Franklin Street, and the blocks that were oriented to take profit of the eastern or the western sun, just to highlight the way they were correctly oriented, and just thus creating similar conditions for all the apartments. They were distributed in two basic types. The A type were single level cells for 3 or 4 family members. And the B types, which were duplex cells, they were called cells. And that was the language taken probably from the Corbusian or the Siam inspired terminology. The duplex cells were located in the larger blocks, and the C are represented. Well, this is the Franklin Street and the commercial premises. This is a picture taken by Antonio Quintana, looking on the southern part of the blocks. We researched the plans of this project in the municipality and found plenty of information, of graphic information. We remade some of these drawings just to take account of the distribution of the different types. These were basic. These were typified. They had typified construction elements like doors or windows. And the cells themselves were conceived as, let's say, as very small, very minimal, probably very close to the ones created in Europe in just the preceding years in the 1920s. But these were conceived in a way that they were distributed in the equal and similar conditions of sun and air, and they shared the same central space, the communal spaces. The duplex apartments were built along staircase, a central staircase, but they shared more or less the same layout as the single-story apartments. They had an entrance on the lower level with a living and the kitchen here, and they had a main private room here, or dormitory, and they had 3 or 2 other in the upper level. This was the state of the complex in 2006 or 2007. This was previous to the 2010 earthquake, and they were after that earthquake they were refurbished, and they are now being more or less well maintained. Finally, the Serrano-Eyzaguirre estate was in a very similar way like the Huemul II, but this was a public and private model. This project was carried out under a new management model, the EMPART, or Caja de Empleados Particulares, Private Employees Fund, to stimulate the construction of affordable housing now in the 1950s or the late 1940s. This Private Employees Fund was worked with associated construction companies that participated in this kind of business, I would say. These are the same architects that later created the Villa Portales mass housing estate that Humberto Bonomo probably certainly presented in an earlier pre-event. But this project was aimed also as a model and as an experimental model around the possibility of creating very different housing programs, but located in also a central part of the city, in a block that was occupied previously by older houses and some industrial manufacturing buildings, and very near the Sacramentinos Church, which was built in the early 19th. This was aimed at promoting a renovation of the southern part of Santiago. Thus, these buildings were created with probably the more or less the same principles of the Huemul II, but this evolved in greater density program. It had a mixed use commercial premises in the Serrano and Eyzaguirre streets corner, but these buildings mixed a wider variety of apartment flats. These were aimed at different family sizes, ranging from 2 to 5 members. So the architects aimed at mixing one level of apartments in the ground and the first and the second floors, and then in the upper levels there were duplex apartments. These housing complexes were aimed at not having elevators because of the maintenance costs. So the duplex apartments were distributed in a certain way that the 4th and the 5th floor were reached through these common staircases, and the 5th floor was reached in the internal part of the apartments. And one of the interesting things about this complex is that by creating this layout on the lot, they took advantage of, let's say, opening the spaces without losing the architectural or the geographical references of the nearby hills or the Sacramentinos church. They were also built with some fixtures, let's say blue or red or orange colored mosaics, and some panels painted in yellow or warm colors, with the idea of animating and creating a very livable ambience. So, as a conclusion, we can say that these 3 cases represented here open new possibilities for the development of urban areas close to the center, submitting them to the traditional urban layout, but transforming the relationships between public space and private spaces through the creation of free spaces inside the blocks, or by concentrating the buildings in the center of the blocks. That is to say, as once Renato Agnelli stated in a Docomomo journal, these were modern architecture, sometimes very radical modern architecture, built on the traditional urban grid. Some of these cases had similar developments in later years and served as smaller scale trials of mass housing projects that were carried out in the 1950s and the 1960s. As you can see in this, the aerial photo taken in 1960, the densification of the central part of the city is absolutely evident, but certainly the models of occupation of the lots and the densification of the city largely followed and speculative and models. So as a conclusion, I must give credit for this research work, which was made by me and Cristóbal Molina at the University of Diego Portales, and this was made with the support of the Docomomo Chilean Working Party and the municipality of Santiago. We had the collaboration, with the generous collaboration of the Luis Ladrón de Guevara photographer. He was still alive at that time. And there were other collaborators who made the design of the layouts and the drawings. So thank you very much, and I hope you have enjoyed this presentation. So Horacio can leave here.
Thank you, Andrés. Thank you, Hania, again. We are ready to have some questions or comments. I think Hania is frozen. Yeah, nice. I enjoy very much the presentation of Hania from Caravalleda residence. It is a very nice. Okay, we have questions here. Maybe we must wait for Hania in a few minutes. I think she's trying to connect again. Hania, are you? No, she's out. Valeria, just wait a few minutes. Does anybody have some question for Andrés? Or Andrés, did you put this idea of transformation in? Oh, here is Hania. Go ahead.
Hello. Sorry for
Hania, we
that.
have a question here from Valeria Rodriguez. She's intrigued by the color choices for the Caravalleda residence, particularly the predominant use of yellow, white, and gray. Could you elaborate on the significance of these colors in the architectural design? How do they contribute to overall aesthetic and feel of the residence? Thank you, she said.
So congratulations to Andrés to a very exciting presentation. I loved seeing those aerial views of Santiago and understanding the dealing of the blocks and the different approaches to housing. It's very interesting. Thank you. I will comment later on that. To answer Valeria, which is a Docomomo Venezuela member. Well, I assume, because I haven't asked the architects about that, but these are the same colors as Villa Planchar, you know. And those colors were chosen by Gio Ponti. I mean, he said this villa is going to be white, gray, and yellow, and nothing else. So the Planchars respected that for their house. But then in Caravalleda, it was like the continuation of a saga in a way. So the Caravalleda building is also white, yellow, and gray. And only lately people have forgotten about this relationship, and we find green, apple green, or pink, which are horrible in there. But I think they are understanding. They were visiting the presentation today, so I think they understand now, and they will change those colors to the originals. But it's a tropical building, so yellow and white work perfectly well in Caravalleda, and it's very beautiful.
Thank you, Hania. Andres, could you explain a little bit more on the possibilities of the transformation of these buildings, or only you speak about only the conservation?
Yes, well, these buildings have been submitted to several, let's say, challenges. For example, the Huemul II project is still a low-income housing project, but transformation of these quite rigid structures is quite difficult. Nevertheless, by managing different types of apartments, they are being able to be occupied by different kinds of dwellers. They are not the original dwellers, of course, but they are still being more or less well managed. That is to say that, for example, after the 2010 earthquake, there was an opportunity to refurbish the Huemul II estate, which was damaged, internally damaged, and but a more radical transformation in use or is quite difficult because of the structural systems used and the layout of the plan themselves. I think that the Santa María building has suffered major transformations in the internal distribution of the apartments. These were big apartments that have been divided into smaller units. I think that I am not very aware of more recent events, but in the 2000s, there were some apartments that were being transformed into smaller units. This is a very different kind of building because it was aimed at the higher income proprietors, and in time they were rented to very different kind of dwellers, and there have been some difficulties in the management of these buildings. Their proximity to the center also poses some challenges, but transformation in itself seems more difficult also in this case. I think that transformation in the surroundings of these apartment blocks is already taking place at a very fast pace, as you have seen in the aerial views. There have been intense activity around many of these buildings. So we are expecting that the surroundings of these apartments will be severely transformed.
I have a question for Andres.
Yes.
Yes, I was fascinated, as I said, about seeing the city from above and watching all the different approaches to building the blocks, no? And pardon my ignorance, but I would like to know more. You have done a wonderful survey on all the different typologies that have been used through time in the different decades and different moments of the history of the architecture, modern architecture in Chile. Perhaps you know if there have been any attempts to unify, like making Santiago to become more like Barcelona, like choosing one better working, the best working alternative for the blocks and trying to make a plan. Has it been sometime done or ever?
I don't know. These were experimental projects. These were followed by similar projects elsewhere. In fact, the Huemul II was certainly not the first project built in Santiago. There was also an earlier project in Santiago, which had a similar layout, but less sophisticated in its way of in its layout, but a wider transformation derived from these models are very quite difficult nowadays. These are lots that today, for the property regime and the costs of the square meter in these areas are quite very different, and they would certainly not allow a follow-up of projects like these ones, which were and are quite well appreciated by their dwellers. Probably the apartments are small, but the common areas are very really appreciated, although they have been invaded by cars and so on. They remain. Let's say they remain as a valuable housing stock in Santiago, but unfortunately, the city has been taken over by a speculation that aims at higher densities, higher land occupation, and so on, and very little had been apparently learned from these experimental projects.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Some comments? Claudio, go ahead, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you. Yes, it's for Hania. Yeah, I understand that you explain about the influence of Gio Ponti in the work of Caravalleda residents. I also understand the connection with the idea of the hotel that Benacerraf and Gomez did. But looking for the expression of the Residencia Caravalleda is the shape of the way of that the building connect with the context is very similar to the sanatorium of Paimio of Alvaralto. Maybe you could explain more about the possible connections of a building that is also for the health and with the ways of resolve the sanatoriums in hospitals. Are there some connections?
Yes, of course. And I think I mentioned that there's an absolute connection without in many ways to Alvaralto's concepts and an expression in the building. But of course, there was a search when the commission was made to the architects, trying to find the best way to do a house for the elderly in Caracas. At the time, it was a very modern project to undertake, very revolutionary. I mean, it was the first time that a project was done for in this size in the city. So there was a lot of discussions and trips and research done. And I understand that, of course, the marvelous architecture of Alto and that building that you mentioned were taken very much into account. But it's fused with many other things that result on the building. So, and the building has these two faces now. So you have one side that is absolutely different from the other. When you're in the garden, you can feel absolutely like you are near the sanatory of at Paimio in a tropical location. And that has become even more patent through time as the vegetation has grown and the building has melted a little bit more with nature. It really is interesting to see how this works in the Caribbean. This lightness, these curves, and this suave architecture to build a building that expresses calm for the jewelers and make up a peaceful ambiance for everybody that is there. So I think that goal was reached, and people love very much that building. Although I didn't say that in my presentation, but problem is, as everything in Venezuela, that there's no money for conservation. So buildings are standing up still because they are very well built. 50 years later, as they are as they were. They are not as they should be. I mean, and it's very sad to see the railings that are being a little bit destroyed right now. So that whiteness of the lines is almost has faded, and also the yellows of the pavements and everything. So the brightness and the cheerful environment that they had once now it's a little bit more gray. But I like to think that it is a complex building, very nice to look at and to try to understand all the lines of influence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anya, we have two questions here. So one is from Germán Fuenmayor. He's asking if you have any information about the contribution of Joel Sanz on the Caravalleda project as collaborator of the studio. And the other is from Edgar Sanchez. He's asking for the information about the designers of the logotype or the signaletics.
Yes, of course. And
Thanks for your presentation.
Yes, of course, Joel Sanz, who passed away some years ago, a very close friend of ours and a wonderful architect. He was working at the firm of Rafa Gomez and was an associate in this project. What can I say? They were working together in that, and it's true. How much there is of Joel Sanz's input in the building, I cannot tell, because this is a very early building in this firm's career. I mean, they started in 1970. This is 1974, so they were young and strong and courageous and powerful at the moment in the studio. They're doing many buildings at the time, and they needed to have also smart collaborators to help them to make these projects come true. And for the other question for Mr. Sanchez, yes, it's nice that you notice the logo on the top of the elevator shaft. This was done by a very good Venezuelan designer, Johan Osot, who is related with the family of the Planchards. But he himself is very important. He's not living in Venezuela anymore, but he was the director of the Instituto de Diseño for many years, which is a very important educational facility and institution here that started the training and education in design in our country. So yes, and it's a beautiful logo. It's a letter P that looks like a leaf, the leaf of a tree.
Here we are, Maria Fernanda Jawa. Hi, Maria Fernanda. Nice to see you here. Many thanks to Hania and Andres for their very interesting presentations. Question for Hania. What is the current situation of the buildings? It is still operating as a private residence. You talk a little about its current state and its deterioration. Apart from the general conditions of Venezuela, it is due to any particular change in this regard? And for Andres, also about the current state of preservation, have you observed any difference in the state of preservation in relation to the different conditions of the three examples for rent, post-horizontal, or public housing?
I prefer Andres goes first.
Thank you, Hania. Thank you, Maria Fernanda. Nice to have you here with us. Yes, there are. Let's say the Serrano-Eyzaguirre estate is the one that is the most well preserved, although they had very little maintenance work in these buildings. It has been very little transformed. In fact, it has been recently, I think that it was recently, I have been told it had been recently painted, and some of the colors, the original colors, are still reserved. These are very fragile projects, but paradoxically, the lower income estates are quite well maintained, considering the conditions of the dwellers. But the Santa Maria building, which was as recently, I just said, was aimed at the higher income dwellers, it has been not very quite well maintained. So I think that it has to do with the location of the project. It is surrounded by neighborhoods that had not been quite had been affected by economical cycles of downs and lows. The original dwellers, obviously, if they lived there, they have left their buildings. They rented their apartments, and the rental regime has brought in some dwellers that, they were not of a similar condition, I would say, and communal areas management has brought to a decay of the general state of the building. Unfortunately, and this is a very unfortunate thing, but we could foresee in the future the possibilities of refurbishing this great big building just opposite of the Fine Arts Museum and facing the river and taking advantage of the being just right in front of the center of the city. But I think we must wait for a more favorable economical and social context for this to happen. And the Huemul II finally is, I think it's quite well maintained. It has been repainted in white and red hues after the bluish hues it was painted in the early 2000s. The pool is in working condition, and some of the public areas have been recovered from the vehicles that were that had invaded the internal parts of the estate. The Huemul II has been affected by the increasing income of the dwellers. They had automobiles, they had cars, a lot of social, let's say, changes that are not generally absorbed by the architectural structure of the estate. So that's it. I hope I have answered the question.
Yes, you have. Thank you, Andres. Nice to see you. Nice to see all of you. Horacio.
Hola.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. I am just a little thing. I am very interested in this topic because we still hear that the modern architecture has all these flaws that are the reason of its actual state, and many times we still hear that. So I think that it is nothing new what I'm saying, but I think that we still have to look at this in each particular case, because there are very different situations, and these different situations have different results in the state of preservation of the buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Fernanda. We have another question for Hania from Cristina Ballesteros. Hi, Hania, I'm really curious on why they choose to build this project in Caravalleda. Could the weather and being close to the beach might might have been a factor to consider?
Yes, of course, but I wanted to respond first to Maria Fernanda's question in terms of this about the building in Caraballeda. Yes, as I said before, decay has come with the years, and there are things that are happening that are very difficult to manage. For instance, the lack of electricity, which is affecting the whole of Venezuela. I mean, it rains and we don't have light, we don't have internet, and that's not only in Caraballeda, but here where I live in Caracas, it's happening all the time. And of course, you cannot have a residence that has no electricity, because all people and ill people need to be absolutely cared with electricity. So there are new problems so that the building has to respond to, buy an electrical plant, for instance, which is very expensive. But then also the necessity for appraisal in modern architecture in Venezuela is so big, because people have to understand that these kind of projects are something remarkable. They are pieces of art that are scattered in the landscape. And this part of Caracas, which we consider that Caraballeda and the coastline is the other side of the city, the marine side of the city, its other facade on the sea, on the Caribbean Sea. This is a wonderful place for modern architecture. There are many, many good examples around of Residencia Caraballeda. So there should be more discussion and visits to the surroundings and the buildings that had been destroyed and they're in very bad shape. And the Residencia has been forgotten for too long. And I thank you and all of you for this invitation and gave me the opportunity to speak about this building, because it is from the 1970s, and of course it's only 50 years old, but then it is in need of a conservation plan, and absolutely in terms of it needs a preservation of everything. I mean, the garden, it's a different situation now. What do we do with the garden? Ponti was talking about the sunshine in all the rooms. Now we have this shade that is beautiful too. So there are many things to discuss in contemporary terms as things have changed, but the preservation need is the same as always. And for the other question, of course, the Planchards wanted something that in a way could evoke the spectacular site they found for their home in Caracas and El Cerrito, this hill with the wonderful view of the valley. And in a way, the slopes of the Ávila Mountain on the side of the sea in Caraballeda have also this amazing scenic panorama of the coastline. And the best thing it has is that you have the fresh, cool air coming down from the mountain always. And you have the warm breeze coming up from the sea always. So the building is like a radiator. If you open a window on this side and you open a door on the other, you can graduate the temperature. If you feel cold, then you close the door a little bit and you open up the door on the other side, and you can graduate the temperature everywhere. So it's magnificent. It's like a how do you call that? A clavicordio, the well-tempered clavecin. It's like you can play the building in terms of climate. And that's an amazing situation and an example that can be evoked and redone in many places, because it works wonderfully for the doers, the old people, but for anybody who could live in a building like that.
Thank you, Hania.
Thank you.
So, anyone else? So, let me thanks again to Hania in Caracas, Venezuela, and Andres in Santiago, Chile, Maria Fernanda, Claudio, and Docomomo Venezuela members who are a lot here. We invite you to the other pre-events. You can check in the web page. There are so many this year, and probably next year we have some more. So thank you again for being with us, and we hope you can organize something for the 18th International Docomomo Conference to December 2024. Thank you so much. See you next time.
Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you for attending.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Horacio. Bye-bye, Claudio,
Bye.
Anita, Humberto, Maria Fernanda. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you.
Bye.